Sistine Chapel, the Vatican, 1948. It's what they have always prayed for, the cure for evil. So why is the Catholic Church hellbent on destroying the Jesus drug? He couldn't stop himself. He kept thinking of what the Roman people had done to Pope John when they discovered he was really Pope Joan. The Cardinals had led the mob in tearing the impostor limb from limb. Now Cardinal Kowalski thought they might do the same to him. Eden, after all, was his project. Designed to create heaven on earth, it had delivered hell instead. Had he somehow listened to Satan rather than God? Was the Antichrist's greatest triumph to pose as Christ and be accepted as the Messiah? The drug that cured evil was not at all what it seemed. The miracle pill that stopped the apocalypse was itself the apocalypse. Kowalski stared at the lower section of the fresco behind the altar, showing the damned being dragged into hell. The Last Judgment, Michelangelo's masterpiece, had always been his favorite painting. On his frequent trips to the Sistine Chapel, he had sat for hours staring at the frightening images. Now he felt that his own day of judgment had come. As the commotion around him grew, Kowalski heard the booming voice of Cardinal Monsenti. He imagined that it would be this same voice that would one day announce the end of the world. God will never forgive us for this, Monsenti bellowed. He was a huge man of 6 feet 4 and 240 pounds. He had once trained as a tenor. He had even sung for the Pope on his birthday. This time there was no music in his voice. "We will never survive this scandal," he said. "This will destroy us all. The church, may God forgive me, is finished." Kowalski closed his eyes. Maybe Monsenti was right. Maybe the church was over. He no longer knew what to think. He was as dismayed as the rest of them, probably much more so. He needed something that would wash the pain away, something that would remind him, in the simplest possible way, that life could still be enjoyed. He thought of whiskey, a fine Scottish single malt like the Glenfiddich he treated himself to every Christmas. But there was no whiskey in the Sistine Chapel. Instead, he had to face the reality that he was the cause of the Sacred College of Cardinals of the Holy Roman Church having to be assembled in emergency session for the first time ever. It was appropriate that they were meeting in the Sistine Chapel, beneath Michelangelo's great painted ceiling, with the face of God above them, watching their every move, scrutinizing every one of their thoughts. What they did now would decide the future of everything, of the church, and even humanity itself. The cardinals were wearing their scarlet vestments and the traditional broad-brimmed, tasseled hats, now worn only on special occasions. As Kowalski knew well, no occasion could be more special than this one. Almost all of them were on their feet, demanding their chance to speak. Those still sitting seemed dazed, unable to process what was happening, unable to digest the information they had been given. A few were openly in tears. Pius XII, the pontiff who had personally placed the cardinal's hat on Kowalski's head 7 years before, was sitting white-faced and rigid on his papal throne, the grand, imposing cathedra, positioned directly in front of the Sistine Chapel's grand altar. His hands were visibly trembling. If people can really age in minutes, then it had happened right here to Pius. His face was drained, his eyes expressing infinite weariness. 2 aides flanked him, clearly concerned for his state of health. It didn't help that he had recently been diagnosed as suffering from angina. Kowalski's own heart was feeling the strain. His blood pressure had become so dangerously high that doctors had immediately put him on strong medication. His health reflected his opinion of himself, declining dramatically. How had it come to this? In his 4 decades as a cleric in the Catholic Church, he had believed himself one of the good men, indeed the best men, making a real difference, righting the ancient wrongs. He had regarded himself as honest, truthful, practical, a fighter for justice and all high and noble things. Now he wondered. He wondered above all if the devil had whispered and he had strained to hear. Did he choose to listen to the siren voices of the wicked, the fallen? Did he become their unwitting agent, the useful idiot? He wondered if Eden, his initiative that he believed would transform humanity, had in fact destroyed his beloved church. When he had entered Auschwitz 3 years earlier, shortly after the Russian forces liberated it, he had never imagined what he would find there. The survivors of the death camp had looked like the damned from Michelangelo's paintings. Some of them, wild with hysteria, had mentioned strange pills. He wished he had never listened to them. He wished he had never gone into medical compound Z1. Above all, he wished he had turned his back on the stockpile of yellow pills that the Nazis had referred to only as drug 4. However, when his aides told him what captured Nazi scientists had said about drug 4, he could scarcely believe it. If any of it was true, then mankind might be given a second chance from the unlikeliest source, almost as if God had been determined to bring the brightest good from the darkest evil. That seemed appropriately redemptive. Don't they say that the darkest hour is just before the dawn? Amazingly, it must have been an oversight or accident. The Russians had allowed his team to remove drug 4 and all the scientific documents associated with it. Actually, they seemed to be under high-level diplomatic instructions to ensure good relations between the Soviet Union and the Catholic Church. Probably, they had not had time to properly assess just how significant drug 4 was, or they had no desire to touch anything the Nazis had been harvesting in death camps. If so, they were far more insightful than Kowalski. They knew you must never dance with the devil, no matter how attractive his tune. No one makes better music than Satan. A few days later, the Russians rounded up most of the Nazis who had worked on drug 4. They didn't bother with a trial. They summarily hanged all of them. Only one man escaped the mass execution, the Mephistophelian SS doctor who had been in charge of the compound and the drug's development and had fled a week before the Soviets arrived. There were no photographs of the mastermind of drug 4. No one knew his real name. He had wiped out all evidence pertaining to his true identity. Prisoners and colleagues alike called him by a very strange nickname, Todd, the German word for death. Kowalski felt as if he himself had become death. Many of his fellow Cardinals were still staring numbly at the screen where the film had been shown of the catastrophe in the Amazonian rainforest near the shanty town of Arizari. Kowalski's mind drifted back 3 years to the special meeting to approve Project Eden. It had all been so different back then. He could remember the Pope's inspirational speech, just weeks after the end of the war. From the infinite horror of the death camps has come infinite hope, Pius said. In the hour of our despair, God has come to us and granted us a glimpse of heaven. From the hands of murderers has come a wondrous gift. From an earthly hell, a new Eden may be born. The tragic dead can give birth to brilliant new life. What better sign of his divine compassion could there be than for God to allow the worst desolation to be transformed into perfect love, to allow killers to be the unwitting agents of peace? We must grasp this chance. We would never be forgiven if we did not. They had all wanted to believe that, or almost all of them. Cardinal Umbasini, the eminent Grise who had guided Cardinal Monsenti's rise to prominence, led a small group of dissenters. Make no mistake, Umbasini had warned, this is the dance macabre. They had chosen to dance anyway. Now payment was demanded. If something seems too good to be true, throughout the long debate to approve the project, Umbasini had steadfastly opposed the motion. With his anemic face and skeletal fingers, he had seemed like a Nosferatu. Over and over again he had repeated a chilling mantra with that thin, asthmatic voice of his, out of the depths come the worst monsters. He had a bald head, a squint in one eye, and severe facial eczema. It was an appearance that made it difficult for people to look at him for long. No one warmed to him, or his Cassandra speeches. You think this is a gift from God, he said until they were sick of the sound of him. You are wrong. Then the ice-cold finale. This is Satan's pill. This is the broad, smooth road to hell. In the end, Umbasini alone had refused to add his signature to the charter to establish Eden. For that, he was ostracized from the corridors of power. He was given a research post in the Apostolic Library within the Vatican, where his superiors could keep an eye on him. It was a job with no influence, no status, a career dead end. For a man of Umbasini's ambition, there could have been no worse fate. Now, looking at the film from Eden, at the pictures of the dead bodies, no one doubted that Umbasini had been proved correct. Yet for 2 years the reports coming from Eden had been so good that the church had been preparing to make a formal announcement to the world about a glorious new dawn for humanity. Then silence. No word from the settlement for a month, until that final message, so appalling in what it hinted at. Not Eden, it said. Nothing else. There was no explanation. That absence was the most chilling thing of all. The Pope had asked Kowalski to organize a team to go to Brazil to find out what was happening in the depths of the rainforest. That was a week ago. Now he was back with the evidence, and memories that would haunt him forever. Whatever had happened to those people, it belonged to the stuff of nightmare. They had come from the horrors of the European death camps, only to find themselves in an even worse death camp. Run by the church. The most terrible thing of all was how they died, mass suicide of the most macabre kind. They had bashed their own heads with rocks, scratched and hacked at their own faces, amputated their limbs, performed every grotesque act of self-mutilation possible. Why would they turn on themselves like that? All of them had been dressed identically in grey boiler suits. They had worn grey masks. Why? What did it mean? What had happened to them? One thought kept going through Kowalski's head. What if some kind of inner evil had surfaced amongst the members of the community, something caused by the miracle pill from Auschwitz that the settlers had taken every day for 2 years? Was Cardinal Umbasini right when he talked of Satan's pill? Silence, Pius said at last to bring the commotion to an end. We embarked on this project with goodness in our hearts. We thought only of a new beginning for mankind. During the war, we had gazed into hell's deepest circles, its innermost secrets and torments. We had watched man descend into depravity from which it was possible he might never return. But we all believed that God could not have forsaken us like this. There had to be another way. There had to be a second chance, a chance of something better. It came in the shape of the strange gift from the evilest place, from Auschwitz, the devil's settlement, his dark outpost on earth. There was only one doubter, His Eminence Cardinal Umbasini. He warned us that our plan was folly. He has surely been vindicated. As for the rest of us, we must pray for forgiveness, for guidance in our darkest hour. Chaos is closing around us. God, I implore you, show us the light. Point us back to the righteous path. Your flock has gone astray. We need your help to get us back on the right track. Kowalski watched nervously as Pius turned to Umbasini and spoke to the proud old man directly. Cardinal Umbasini, can we find a solution to an impossible question? The Pope put his hand wearily over his eyes, as if blocking his view of a fallen world. Is it better for the Church to lie than to see the destruction of everything we have worked for? Or should 2,000 years of struggle to make the world a better place be consigned to oblivion? Kowalski stared at Umbasini, at the disfiguring eczema on the old man's face. 3 years before, they had argued bitterly in private rooms within the walls of the Vatican. Kowalski had triumphed. But that was then. Umbasini coughed. He got to his feet. He shuffled some papers. He stretched out his long, thin fingers. Kowalski searched Umbasini's face for any signs of what was to come. Would he take the chance to avenge himself? He had endured so many indignities. He had the right. No one would deny him. The facts are simple, Umbasini stated with the dry tone of a lawyer. He had always spoken that way, like a machine. He seemed to have no human blood in him. In a place, the name of which I shall not utter, my colleague Cardinal Kowalski discovered something. Scientific papers claimed that the strange substance had miraculous powers. It could bring to life the words of Jesus Christ when he said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." The Cardinal thought that mankind cried out for this pill. Surely after the most destructive war in human history there had to be hope. He paused. Kowalski waited for the "but." For this, I blame no one, Umbasini said at last. Kowalski gasped. Pius closed his eyes in silent relief. Everyone knew what it meant. Umbasini wasn't looking for revenge or martyrdom. He wanted to be welcomed back into the inner councils of his beloved church. Pius nodded gently to Umbasini. That nod told Umbasini that he was a player again, that he could once again expect the highest offices. He himself might be the next pope. It would be a travesty if he wasn't. Kowalski noticed the slightest trace of a smile passing Umbasini's lips, but then the old man's face returned to its usual deathly pallor. "If we tell the truth, the church will certainly fall," he said. "If we lie, we will be committing a grievous sin, but the church shall survive. We shall have another chance to do the good deeds that we always intended. We shall have the opportunity to atone, to beg God for forgiveness. I propose that we tell the world nothing of Eden. The truth of what happened in the rainforest should be buried for all time. Every trace of the settlement must be obliterated. All of us must swear a solemn oath never to mention the subject. It must seem that there never was an Eden. Every document must be destroyed. If, somehow, word leaks out, then we must deny everything. If we embark on this course of action, there can be no turning back. Therefore, we must all agree upon it, giving our most solemn vows. The vote must be unanimous and binding for all time." With that, he sat down. Pius remained in his papal throne, his hand gripping the sides as though he were holding on to his sanity and what remained of his moral authority. "Thank you, Your Eminence," he said quietly. The Pope looked at the rest of the assembled cardinals. "I endorse what Cardinal Umbasini has said. We can proceed with this plan only if we have unanimous agreement. I now ask each and every one of you to search your consciences, to pray to God for guidance. In a few minutes we shall hold the vote." He closed his eyes. "May God help us." Kowalski closed his eyes. He wondered if it was really possible for Eden to disappear. It wasn't just the cardinals who knew about it. There were many aides too. His own, for example. Father Thomas Flaherty was a brilliant young man from New York who knew as much as he did about the project. Flaherty had that fierce American zeal, that New World spirit that refused to lie down. Would Flaherty be asked to swear to remain silent too? It would be almost impossible to bring him on board. If Flaherty refused to cooperate, then what? "And now the vote," Pius said at last. "I shall ask only one question. Is there any amongst you that rejects the plan put forward by His Eminence Cardinal Umbasini?" Kowalski saw every face turning towards him. He felt naked, as if all his sins had been laid on a table for everyone to scrutinize. "May I ask what will happen to those of us outside this gathering who know about Eden?" he asked self-consciously. He felt as if his bloodstream were transporting a virulent new strain of hypernausea to every part of his body. It was just a question of time before he vomited. "They will also be asked to swear," Pius said. His voice was so very cold. "And if any of them refuses?" Pius did not answer. Nor did anyone else. Kowalski thought that in its whole distinguished history, the Sistine Chapel could never have been more silent. "I repeat my original question," Pius said eventually. "Does anyone refuse to proceed with the plan?" Kowalski found himself lowering his head. He was ashamed. He made no attempt to turn back the irresistible tide. He tried to quell the sickness inside, the scream that refused to go away. "Very well," Pius said. "We shall proceed with Cardinal Umbasini's proposal. If there are any problems, they should be reported to the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura. It will decide what action should be taken." He gripped the sides of his papal throne even more tightly, as if desperately holding on to power, or the last of his faith. "This meeting is now concluded," he said, his voice fading to a whisper. "God forgive us." Kowalski wondered what, or whom, the problems might be. And what action the church would take to ensure they did not remain problems. He looked straight at Michelangelo's Last Judgment. But this time when he looked at the faces of the damned, it was the faces of his fellow cardinals he saw. Most prominent amongst the faces was one he couldn't fail to recognize, his own.